Public dialogue and civic engagement are important. They play a role in improving the health and well-being of Texans across our great state. That's why Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Texas is proud to support Texas Tribune conversations like the one you're about to see.
On my left, you know most of these folks at least so well. Juan Cabrera, who is named the superintendent of the El Paso Independent School District in September of 2013. Previously, he worked as a school law attorney and served as a general counsel and advisor to school districts. A one-time elementary bilingual teacher, Mr. Cabrera spent 20 years away from the classroom working in the technology sector. He has an undergraduate degree from Texas A&I University, what we now know as Texas A&M Kingsville.
No, Texas A&I.
Texas A&I, you know it that way, right.
Right.
And a law degree from the University of Texas School of Law. Lizzette González Reynolds, who I think is the secret weapon in the Texas Education Agency. They don't let her do these kinds of things enough. She's so good, is the Chief Deputy Commissioner of the Texas Education Agency. She's held that post for a little more than 3 years now. Previously, she was TEA's Deputy Commissioner for Statewide Policy and Programs. Before that was Region 6 representative at the U.S. Department of Education under Secretary Margaret Spellings and President George W. Bush. She served Governor George W. Bush as Deputy Legislative Director. She is a graduate of Southwestern University. The invisible but still relevant State Representative Mary Gonzalez, a Democrat from Clint, first won her District 75 seat in the Texas House in 2012. In the 84th session, she serves on the Public Education Committee as well as the Agriculture and Livestock Committee. She previously served as Assistant Dean for Student Multicultural Affairs at Southwestern University, and she's been a program coordinator in multicultural engagement at the University of Texas at Austin. Representative Gonzalez has 2 bachelor's degrees from UT Austin, a master's from St. Edward's University, and is finishing up her PhD from UT Austin. Finally, Eduardo Rodriguez, Eddie Rodriguez, serves as the interim executive director, a volunteer position, of the Council on Regional Economic Expansion and Educational Development, or CREED, a not-for-profit education policy and advocacy group focused on closing the achievement gap for El Paso County students. He is also president, his day job, of Strategic Communication Consulting Group, and he previously spent 20 years at El Paso Electric, where he was general counsel, executive vice president, and COO. Mr. Rodriguez is a graduate of Texas Tech and of the St. Mary's Law School. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel. Mr. Cabrera, it's your town as it's Mr. Rodriguez's town, so I'm going to defer to you with the first question here. And let me ask you about the issue that is on everybody's minds, and that is the resolution of the school finance lawsuit that is now under appeal at the Texas Supreme Court. School finance is the kind of Groundhog Day of public policy issues in the state of Texas. We think it's solved, and then we turn back around, we discover it's not solved. We go to court, we come up with a resolution, then suddenly we find ourselves back in court again. How important for you as a superintendent of an important school district in this state, how important is the resolution of this lawsuit?
Well, I think, we've got a couple of board members here and superintendents that will tell you that that is our most important issue, and especially when you're serving a lot of children of poverty, a lot of English language learners, solving that issue. So now, fundamentally, people need to understand when you use property taxes as the basis or one of the major components for school finance,
yes,
it's structurally flawed. It's never going to work because property taxes aren't equal across the state, and that's going to cause the problem that we've had now for those of you keeping score. I think West Orange Stark 2, which the Supreme Court heard in 2005, was the 8th iteration beginning from Edgewood, right, in the 80s, which, by the way, I was a teacher at Edgewood in the 80s, so I was there when that started with Dr. Vasquez. And so now the Supreme Court has the most recent ruling from Judge Dietz. We expected that they would come out hopefully here in January or February. I think our conundrum may be politics, which is a March election. All of the Supreme Court members are Republican. 3 of them are up for the March primaries. So we were hoping for a ruling here in January, hopefully affirming.
But the cynics in the journalism community, hard to imagine there are any cynics in the media, right, believe that the Supreme Court may kick the decision past the primary to avoid any political blowback on one side or another.
Absolutely.
We don't know, of course, what's going to happen. And it is material in part because what Judge Dietz ruled, Mr. Cabrera, is that if the state is found if the Supreme Court upholds Judge Dietz's ruling, it could mean that the state's on the hook for somewhere in the vicinity of $2,000 per enrolled public school student. We don't know that for sure,
Yes.
which could mean $10 billion more annually or $20 billion more in every biennium for public ed. That money would make a difference in your ability to do your job. Ms. González Reynolds, the fact is money is not everything. We hear all the time, money is not going to solve all of our problems. But by the TEA's own measurement of school performance, come on up. We've already introduced you. Welcome. How was Yarborough?
Oh, disaster.
Okay.
Thank you for being here. Is?
I do. I do. Ms. González Reynolds, by the TEO's own assessment of the performance of schools, the exemplary schools, the schools that at least in the old ranking system were called exemplary, spent on average about $1,000 per student more than the schools that were ranked unacceptable. I don't know that there is a correlation between money and performance in public ed, but that sort of a ranking would suggest that money does matter, at least. Is that right?
This has always been one of those issues that we've always had to pretty much defer because of the situation with the Supreme Court.
Right.
And so I think, but generally, my opinion is that it all depends on the leadership at the school district and how they utilize their funds.
Right.
We have a superintendent in the Rio Grande Valley who is committed to particular initiatives and has used his funding in a very innovative way to target the goals that he sets for those kids.
Yeah.
And pretty much just fashions his programs around those specific, whether they're grants or formula funding or comp ed funding or whatever funding it is that he has to be able to target students so that they reach their academic success.
Right.
So I do think it's a leadership issue more than anything.
So the same bucket of money in the hands of two different superintendents may not produce the same results. That's what that seems obvious, logic.
Yeah.
Right, but you accept the fact, again, offline from the specific matter that's now being litigated, you accept the fact that money does matter. However it matters, it matters.
It matters in the way that the decisions are made about that money.
Right. And the TEA doesn't take a position on a matter like the school finance lawsuit because you're just basically waiting to see what they do and then from the state's perspective we react. I'm going to let Representative González catch her breath. Mr. Rodriguez, from the business community's perspective, are Texas schools doing a sufficient job to warrant more money as they seem to ask for session in and session out?
Well, I think the answer to that really depends, like was already pointed out, how that money is used.
Right.
And the measures of what's happening with the student attainment levels.
Yeah.
And how that then translates into the economic demands of presumably what we're preparing many of these minds to do.
Yeah.
Whether they happen to be, through K through 12, but using that platform now to get to that next level up. So fundamentally, as with anything, the use of the money, the availability of the money, which is the basic issue behind the lawsuit, are all critical to determining how successful your system is going to be with the objective that it's set out. So from the business standpoint, I think we would say, or I can't speak for the entire business community, but the point simply is that given the tie-in to economic evolution, expansion, and development, and the workforce capability that reflects, and that's tied back to education. The short answer to the question you pose is yes, it matters, but it matters on how that execution occurs, and who is managing what and what they're using the money for, and then whether, once it's pretty clear that maybe the money isn't accomplishing what was originally thought, that there is the leadership to step back and say, you know what, we need to figure out a different approach here because this is not producing, in spite of our best intentions, the objectives.
Let's stay with that for a second. So we're talking about the next 5 years of public ed. The pivotal issue for the state on every topic we could be talking about is growth in population and the fact that the population is not only growing quickly and precipitously, but is also changing dynamically. We look out 5 years, we don't know how big the state's going to be, but it's going to be several million more people. You're concerned about workforce preparedness. You're concerned about college readiness, right, in the business community. You're looking at the workforce of tomorrow. We want to sustain the economic growth and health of this state. That's principally your thought about making certain that education is firing on all cylinders. It's going to produce the next generation of workforce.
It's going to produce the next generation of workforce, and it also provides that lifeline to any community, and El Paso being a particularly focused community
Right.
on what can we look to really expand the talent pool and to really take advantage of that talent pool.
Right.
So that no economy is really going to grow itself without looking at itself
Yeah.
and defining what are the opportunities based on where we are
Right.
to where we want to go, and what is the kind of talent pool that we need to have to
Right.
make that work.
And so it breadcrumbs back to education.
Absolutely.
As far as you're concerned. Representative Gonzalez, you were elected after the famous session of 2011.
And I ran because of the famous
And
session
ran
of
specifically
2011.
for that purpose when public education funding was cut. And, you know, if you have a half full view of the world, it was $4 billion. If you have a half empty view of the world, it was $5.4 billion. Either way, it was a historic cut to public education. Are we back to where we were after this session?
No.
Before those cuts. So we're still digging ourselves out as a state of the hole created by those cuts. There are some people who say that those cuts actually have been overstated in terms of the magnitude to public education. I suspect I know what you think, but what do you say to that?
I say no.
Yeah.
I say that anybody who looks at the numbers, who looks at the budget cuts and can look at
Yeah.
inflation, can look at the whole picture, can say, we cut 5.4 and we still haven't reinstated those cuts and our schools are still paying for them. And so we've said a lot of things on the panel, but one thing I think was we haven't dug a little bit deeper. Yes, money counts. Yes, who makes decisions about that money does impact the ways in which that money impacts the students.
Right.
But the difference is privilege. Students who have less access to money have to make sure that they have all of the best people in place. And if anybody is wrong in that puzzle, then they are more impacted than a student who maybe goes to a more well-off school who has a better chance
Right.
at having the right access to resources.
And that's
so
really the issue in the lawsuit, right? It's equity.
it's equity and,
Equity.
and privilege.
Right.
And privilege and the unequal access to privilege for low-income students. And in Texas, low income also means in many ways students of color.
Right.
And students of color or English language learners or students with disabilities. And so we're
Right.
talking about a lot of complex things. And so we can look at things very superficially or maybe just on the surface level. But this minute we start to dig deeper, the minute we start to see the actual impact on the students, we
Yeah.
start to realize the complexity of the situation.
So you sat on the Public Ed Committee this year. There was an attempt in passing to try to get out ahead of this lawsuit by rejiggering the school finance funding mechanism. It didn't make for a variety of reasons that has to do with policy and politics. You're not satisfied in any case that you all sufficiently addressed the school finance question in this last session?
Oh, of course not. I mean,
Yeah.
1759 was a great start to a conversation, but there were still a lot of things with that bill
Right.
that needed to be addressed. And there's a big debate in the legislature. Should we do something now or should we wait till the court cases? And if we wait, then there are kids who are right now in our schools who are
Right.
being impacted by our lack of action. But then if we move and then the Supreme Court says to do something different or has to start all over again, and then
Right.
we go in a cycle. So in some ways, there is no right answer, but unfortunately, the ultimate losers for the situation are the children.
So you come back to the next legislative session in January 2017. You are going to advocate for more money in public ed.
Of course.
Yeah. And you, from a superintendent's perspective, as you go up as a citizen lobbyist and lobby your representatives and lobby the legislature as a whole, you're going to lobby for more money.
Well, I think, I don't disagree with anything that Ms. Reynolds and Mr. Rodriguez said. It does impact, the important thing is you have a good set of board of trustees and a superintendent leadership team spending the money, but you also have to look fundamentally. In 2005, we spent about $7,200 per child. In 2015, we spent about $6,800 per child adjusted for inflation. In the midst of that, we spent 80% of our money on people. So we've got health insurance going through the roof. We've got, increasing employee costs, and it's our job to manage the money, but you can't deny that if you look at a system that's growing, the fastest growing school system across the country. I mean, and Bob, I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember in the last 5 or 10 years, Texas has added between 85,000 and 100,000 kids a year. No other states come close to that,
Right.
maybe even Florida. So we've got to also pay for the growth. And then we've got to look, when you look at the raw numbers, that $300 per kid drop over a 10-year period in the face of increasing health insurance and labor costs.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter what school district you are. You're going to spend 75 to 85% of your money on people.
It's magnified.
So,
right.
so that's an important
And-
factor.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
And the money is, I was on a bilingual education panel last week, And something so insightful was said, and it's so true. The struggle for educators and our education system is that we're trying to prepare a workforce. The difficulty in that is that the workforce that will exist in 10 or 20 years is nothing that we can probably imagine.
Right.
So educating a whole generation for something that we probably can't even comprehend in our heads what it's actually going to look like is very difficult. And so it's hard to be imaginative when you're just making ends meet. It's like a family. It's hard to participate in extracurricular activities as a family if you're working 2 jobs and doing 3 things. And so we really hold back our education system by not giving them all the tools necessary
Right.
to be creative, to really truly develop a workforce in the next 20 to 30 years.
Right. Commissioner, we are constantly trying to assess whether we're doing a good job today. As we look ahead to 5 years or 10 years or 25 years, we have to begin with, are we doing everything we need to be doing today?
Right.
And then we think about what our outbound goals are and what can we do better. Do you think we have an adequate assessment measure for the performance of the 8,500 plus public schools? That is one of the things that is
I mean, I
TEA's
think
purview.
that is one of the issues that we're dealing with right now. The
Yeah.
legislature sent us a message and said, we want you, TEA, to come up with better assessments and better tools to really determine whether or not school districts are doing the job they need to do for their kids.
Right.
Now, whether that's how they utilize their funding or how they provide intervention services, I think there's also, as we look towards the future, in always addressing these issues, because the financial issues are always going to be there. I mean,
Right.
you know, we're already talking about $30 barrel oil, right? This is all going to impact next session and,
Right.
impact our budget next session. So we have to start thinking innovatively, which they do here in El Paso, and which is happening in different parts of the country.
Right.
We're thinking about public-private partnerships and how you can backfill and create the opportunities with the workforce, with your higher ed community, with your healthcare community to really touch kids and really bring those resources around those kids
Yeah.
so that they are touched and they are brought out to their best potential. Money is always going to be an issue. And so, you know, it's going to be an issue particularly when you create an accountability system that is very focused on a sole assessment. That's the charge that the legislature has given us
Right.
as a community. Governor Abbott just appointed the new Next Generation Assessments Commission
Right.
to really think about what are the other factors and indicators that we can look at to really understand how kids are doing.
Right.
So, you know, part of that is going to be this pathways conversation. It is going to be about how well we work with our partners at the local level to really maximize the resources that we can provide to our students.
But of course, regardless of what you call it, whether it's exemplary, acceptable, recognized, acceptable, unacceptable, A, B, C, D, F,
Right.
whatever you do, at the end of the day, we should be able to sit back, you at TEA should be able to sit back and say, is the public education system of this state doing a sufficient job or not? What is take a satellite view. Are we doing a good job or not? Texas likes nothing more than to puff its chest out and talk about how we're first at everything and best at everything. Do we have anything to brag about in the public education realm in Texas today?
I believe so. I mean, I think our school districts are doing amazing things with the student population that is growing within their local communities. More kids are taking the SAT and ACT. More kids are getting on the path towards college readiness, and or trying to find opportunities to build different pathways, like which House Bill 5 did with the endorsements, to really identify how they can get into the right endorsement so that they can reach post-secondary success. Now, are we doing a 100% job? I think that the detractors came out a couple of weeks ago when our NAEP scores flatlined and even dipped a little bit.
And before that, when we discovered that our SAT scores are at a 22-year low, I mean, we've had some
But
bad
again,
indicators of late.
But our participation has increased
More kids
exponentially.
taking it.
More poor kids.
So those
more
things
kids
may
of
not be the whole
color.
story.
No, absolutely not. I mean, you
Right.
can look at the surface, just like the representative said, and say, okay, here's kind of what's happening. But we've got to stop beating up our school districts.
Right.
I mean, part of this is, you know, yes, we have an accountability system, and yes, maybe it is still a little bit pass fail, and we really need to figure out what it is that are making these school districts better.
Right.
But if you look back 20 years ago when I first got started in public ed, there was a very general feeling, you know, where everything was measured in the aggregate. Yes, we're doing great. Look at our kids. Look, we're doing great. Then once you slice and dice and you realize, well, the subgroups weren't doing so well.
Yeah.
We're seeing subgroup performance increase. Again, it's not at the tip top as we all want it to be.
Right.
But all these superintendents, all these educators, all these teachers are working towards achieving those goals. Nobody's giving up on kids anymore, like I believe they were doing 20, 25 years ago. I mean, I came from Harlingen. I grew up in the Valley, you know, and I just so happened to be one of those kids who was like, how do I get out? How do I get out? I mean, I love Harlingen. I love Rio Grande Valley. It's not an assessment on the Valley, but at the time, I wanted to get out. And I had friends who were just fine. So I had that goal. Well, I got to go to college. So I'm going to do everything I can do to do it. And my friends who were just kind of so, well, you know, they would get trapped into other areas. That's not happening anymore. People really care about where their kids are going because they want them to stay in the community, and I'm sure that's what's happening.
And you feel like it's a good thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm not going to ask you to speak on behalf of the entire business community, but Bill Hammond, who is a former state representative from Dallas and is the head of the Texas Association of Business and a persistent and gleeful antagonist of the TEAs, in the last week said, well, the TEA just did an assessment of our schools, and something like 87% of our schools were found acceptable. He's basically, not his words, mine, he basically compares the assessment of our public schools to middle school field day. Everybody gets a ribbon. That there's not really an adequate way to differentiate, and that the TEA and the assessment system are too generous to schools in Texas so that everybody feels good, when in fact the performance is not exactly what the measurements have been. Again, you speak on your own behalf or on behalf of the business community. Are you all satisfied that we're doing a good enough job?
Well, I think that when you look at, especially, you know, when you mentioned that the last foray you had here was on the demographics.
Yeah.
And the demographics are critical to the success of not only the region, but the state as a whole.
Right.
And El Paso in particular has got that cutting edge in that respect with the Hispanic demographic. We know that it's an underperforming demographic generally. And that from that standpoint, even as we're making progress, we need that progress to go even faster.
Right.
So I can't really speak to Mr. Hammond's perspective on that. I can tell you that from the engagement of what we're trying to do, working with the public education system, has been the idea of how can we move this train faster?
Yeah.
How can we, with the improvements that have actually happened,
Right.
make this go faster? Because the opportunity, the incentive,
Right.
the consideration for the students, for the kids, whether they want to stay in a location or whether
Right.
they want to go elsewhere. If they don't have the chance, if they don't have the opportunity,
Right.
if they don't see where that end line is going to get them to, then we're not making
So
progress.
you're impatient in the sense that you'd like to see the progress go faster, but are you satisfied given the fact that you know you can't force this to go faster than it is?
Well, no, I don't think we're satisfied that we can't force it to go faster. I think
Yeah.
we can have dialogue, discussion. When we were talking about the finances previously, you know,
Yeah.
the issues come in about, you know, what kind of opportunities could actually be put in place. You know, we've got centers around our region, for example. I know it's around the state of Texas. We've got dual credit opportunities. You've got early college high schools.
Yeah.
This is a way to address, in some respects, and maybe even in all respects,
Right.
this equal access issue that gives the student base, that, you know, the majority of the student population that otherwise might not necessarily have a clear idea of where they want to go, but at least is prepared to recognize where they need to go.
Right.
And then utilize that, because they reach that stage when they graduate from high school and they know they've got a series of choices that they can make because of their preparation.
Right.
That's what, from our standpoint, we really want to see continue to be pushed. That's how we think that attainment gap can
Yeah.
be closed, recognizing that we are making progress. We're not here to suggest that progress isn't being done. It's not like you can say, well, the needle's actually going the wrong way. The needle's going the right way. The question is, have we woken up to the absolute critical need
Right.
too late to recognize that we've got to be pushing this train at a bullet speed?
Much, much harder.
Instead of, you know, not that it's a steam locomotive, but it's not necessarily at the high-end speed.
Representative, are you satisfied with how we're doing?
That's a loaded question.
Sure, it's a loaded question. I like asking loaded questions. I hope I get a good answer from
And
you.
that's why I like you. But here's where I think we struggle. I still feel that our schools do perpetuate inequities that exist in our state. And I think that's dangerous for the next generation. Here's where I think we are doing well. I think we have a lot of great superintendents. I think we have a lot of great principals and teachers. I think that our local schools are genuinely caring and are moving the ball forward. I think systematically we haven't fixed a lot of our problems, and I
Right.
think that's the difference.
Yeah, and do you know what those problems are?
I can write you a dissertation on it.
You probably are writing one right now, in fact.
Yes, sir.
Let's accept Representative Gonzalez's perspective on this, Mr. Cabrera, that we have good superintendents, good principals, good teachers. We know what the challenges are. People are working hard. We're seeing some progress. We'd like it to go faster. If I said to you, how could you be better in educating kids 5 years from now? You get to wave a wand. You have the power to change 3 things. What would it be? What would you actually do if you could, to make the output better?
Well, one of them is actually, probably nobody would think it'd be important, but I think the social and emotional support of our children. Recognize that it's not just about poverty, but they bring a lot of issues to the classrooms, especially in our kids of poverty. So I think, first of all, making sure that we are not only set up as a academic system institution, but we're also set up to help and support and deal with these children that come to us with a lot of issues, right? They need to be safe, secure, and well-fed, and we need to make sure we take care of that. I think the schools of the future have to absolutely take advantage of the fact that we've got technologies that exist that can really do some diagnostics about what's going on with a child in terms of learning styles, learning gaps, learning needs, and using to take from our charter schools a blended learning approach to say the teacher is the most important aspect of a great education, but you've got to recognize that a human being can't differentiate instruction for 25 kids. You have to take advantage of the diagnostics that exist and create an individual digital learning profile for a child, and help to make sure that we are working on their individual needs. At the end of the day, in my opinion, we need to focus on creating a relevant, engaging education system that prepares them for these future jobs. And to me, the future jobs are not about learning facts and getting more academic knowledge. It's about the 4 C's, right? It's about communication, creative thinking, collaboration, and now I'm like Rick Perry, I can't remember the 4th.
Just say Department of Energy. It's
Department of Energy is where we're going to close, that's right.
Listen.
Critical thinking.
Critical thinking.
Yeah.
So you talked about social and emotional learning. You talked about technology helping to personalize the experience of educating kids. What was your third? What would your third?
It's basically teaching a child how to think, right?
Teaching a child how to think.
Those 4 C's about communication,
Right.
teach them how to think. Because when I talk to, I just came out of the private sector. I don't really care what your grades were. I want to know, do you have the social and emotional? Do you have the social intelligence to be productive in my workplace and anticipate problems before they arise?
Okay, so we're going to come to grades and student assessment with Mrs. González Reynolds in a second, heads up. But let me ask you a question. Do you have the human and financial resources to accomplish those 3 things over the next 5 years that you've just enumerated?
I think that we have to really take a look with the legislature, looking at what we're doing in terms of these other innovations to create more dynamic classrooms.
It may involve doing new things with new resources, and it may involve blowing up the system and doing new things with old resources.
But one of the things we're doing at EPISD, and I think we have to do this across all the school districts, is you have to blow up your old org chart to say, okay, if we want to be a 21st century school district that prepares kids for different jobs, then our existing organizational chart may not get us there. So let's look to make sure that we're supporting a different sort of
education. So as the cliche goes, Uber, but for public education, right? We need a disruptor.
Here's our biggest challenge.
Not a big Uber fan, no.
Here's our biggest challenge, and UTEP is a great partner with us. This is fundamentally what's going to happen if it has to happen for us to be great. A teacher is no longer a disseminator of facts. They're a facilitator of learning. You have to have student agency so a child can own their learning and develop those other skills that we need to be successful. So get all the standards-based instruction they need, but be able to learn these other skills that Mr. Rodriguez wants to hire those kinds of people. Just because you did great on a star doesn't mean you're going to be great at a job.
Perfect handoff. So we've had this conversation over the last 2 sessions at least about testing of our kids. So we wonder, is the assessment measure of our schools adequate? Is the assessment measure of our kids adequate? A lot of discussion of No Child Left Behind, about accountability and about testing. We took standardized tests from 15 to 5 in the 2013 session. I thought at that point we were done. And then come around to the 2014 election cycle, both the Democrat and Republican running for lieutenant governor said, no, we should take them down to 1 or maybe even 0. And I just wondered at that point, if I'm a parent with a kid in public school, how do I know how my kids are doing? So how are we doing on that front, and where do we need to go next?
Again, so this new commission just got appointed discuss what the next generation of assessments look like. I mean, part of the problem is, number one, just in general, I think as an agency, we need to get out of the way of school districts. We need to be able to allow them to innovate and to be able to do the things they need to do and identify the characteristics of what they bring to their kids as a school system. But with respect to the assessments, I think part of the problem is the relevancy. There are many parents out there that just don't understand what does this assessment mean for me and for my kid? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, you know, it's particularly in this push by the federal government to really tie test scores to teacher evaluations. Everybody loves their teacher. I have a third grader, a fifth grader, and a seventh grader. I love my teachers, and I don't want, you know, because they had a bad day, to be dinged because of one score, one score. And that for parents resonates. And that's why you saw this groundswell of parent opposition to testing.
Right.
And so it's really a matter of, I think we have excellent tests. I mean, the STAR test has been the way, the process and putting it together, it's so complex, but at the end of the day, it's a very rigorous, it's a very well-designed test. The issue is, what does that mean for me and for my kids and for my campus and for my
Right.
school district?
If you fail the STAR test or any of the standardized assessments that we put our kids through, that doesn't mean they're dumb or they haven't been
No.
sufficiently educated. It may be about test taking as opposed to learning. That seems to have been the argument when we pushed back on 15 tests 2 sessions ago, right?
It was. I mean, really, the thread that unraveled the whole, you know, scarf per se was the 15%. When you base 15 tests on a kid's, you know, their score at the end of their senior year. So there was a sense of bringing reasonableness to the assessment system. I think last session they started talking about 3 through 8, and then as we know, right now they have said there's a compromise about ESEA reauthorization, so that'll also have an effect on where we go with our assessments next
Right.
legislative session. If they pare down the tests, I can see this legislature looking at, going in that direction. So,
And is that a good idea?
I think it just depends on the conversations that end up happening over this next year with this. What are other ways to indicate success? I
Right.
think that's critical.
Yeah. Right.
And because, again, as a parent, I don't think that my kids should be defined by one exam.
Representative, is the legislature going to stand back from this issue and let the local communities, parents, superintendents, and others have a say in this, or are you all going to top down this? There seems to have been a lot of tension on a lot of issues where the legislature stepped in and said, we like local control, we just don't like it when locals control things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what they say.
Yeah, and so on a bunch of issues that we discovered that the state tried to top down it, and I'm wondering, are you all going to top down it on this issue, or are you going to let the communities have their voice in this conversation?
Well, trying to predict the legislature is like trying to predict what I'm going to do tomorrow. But no, I know what I thought was funny.
Yeah.
The weather.
What are you going to wear?
What am I going to wear tomorrow?
Yeah.
But here's what I will say. Senator Taylor did say in a panel last month at the Tribune Fest that we are going to re-examine our assessments, that there needs to be a transformation in the ways that we do accountability and assessments. So I think we are going to address it. Whether or not the local voice will be part of that conversation, and not only part as a participatory part, but part as an agency part that gets to make decisions, I'm not sure if the legislature is going to get there.
Is there a better way, Representative, if we look out 5 years, to know in 5 years more about and more meaningful information about how our students are doing?
Of course.
And what would that be?
That is, well, here's what I will say.
Yeah.
I think our testing doesn't recognize the complexity of our students, of our region, of our state. There is diversity on multiple levels that the test cannot capture. I think that the test, I agree that the test is better than it was, but my struggle with, and you kind of mentioned this, is the ways in which it's impacting the mental health of our students and even our teachers. And so I think that needs to be examined, because I don't think we've looked at that piece of the puzzle. And third, I'm not necessarily sure that our test really to give us a good grasp of whether or not young people are developing critical thinking skills, which we know is the most important thing for the next generation.
Right.
So I think those 3 things need to be looked at as we move forward with assessments.
Mr. Rodriguez, the next 5 years of education will not only occur, we know, in public schools, traditional public schools. Increasingly, charters are part of the conversation, and more so as a result of work done in each of the last 2 legislative sessions, allowing for more charters to exist. And there's going to be a move, we already know from the Lieutenant Governor's interim charges, to try on the Senate side of the legislature to try to implement something closer to vouchers. He won't call it that, they won't call it that, but it will be some kind of school choice program that involves money getting into the hands of parents who are dissatisfied with their kids' education and allowing them to move their kid to a different option outside the system. From the business community's perspective, how do you feel about that? Do you think that we need to expand options for parents to get our kids educated?
Well, as getting back to the point I made earlier about
Yeah.
accelerating this pathway.
That may be one way to do it.
Exactly. Plus, the other factor, and I think everybody's touched on this in one shape or another, when you're developing, and I'm no expert in this area by any stretch, but when you're developing a human mind, and I think that's the challenge ultimately that we've
Yeah.
got with respect to any kind of disruptive process to improve our objective, which is that any step we take that holds that development back
Yep.
is a situation that we ultimately will pay for, whether it's done on an individual basis or whether it's done on a collective basis.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, with respect to options, the question comes down to what's best for the nature of the students that you're dealing with.
Right.
And in that regard, the optionalities or the choices that they could have that could channel them more effectively
Right.
would appear to be something that actively should be encouraged
So if
within
you
the public
if
system.
you limit the choice that they have and that their families have, then you limit their ability to become everything they can be.
I think that that's basically correct.
You know, Representative Gonzalez, the argument on the Lieutenant Governor's end of this is, what do you hate about underprivileged kids who don't have opportunity that you want to keep them from realizing the same dreams that you might have for your own kids? If you limit choice, you're basically racist, or you're basically biased against these kids who may not otherwise have opportunity. You've heard this argument. He is as passionate about it as anybody.
Yes, but my struggle with that argument is that it doesn't recognize a systematic issue of education. So I went to the National Conference of State Legislators, and there was a bipartisan work group that looked at high-achieving academic countries. And the number one things that all these countries had in common was recognizing that education is a system. And the minute you start to tear apart that system through multiple choice options, the system becomes weaker, and thus we are not strengthening the system for all and just picking out 1 or 2 young people to be successful, as
Right.
opposed to raising up everybody. I would rather,
Right.
we don't get that many days to work in education policy. I would rather spend all my energy making sure our public schools, in which all our kids are part of, are the strongest and best and most effective public schools, than try to tear away resources from our public schools.
You're sympathetic to the idea that if we go further in the direction of charters, you're sympathetic to the idea that if we go more in the direction of charters and choice, ultimately you undermine the health of the public education system.
Which, like, these kids that the Lieutenant Governor is talking about are the kids that are mostly in this system. I'm sympathetic to that. I have a younger sister who's still in school who, you know, as Mr. Cabrera and I talked about, she has Down syndrome and she goes to our public schools here in El Paso. And she wouldn't have the same opportunities in some of these other schools. And so we need our public schools to be strong for all of our kids.
Right. Mr. Cabrera, from a superintendent's perspective, you're an innovator, right? You actually have
Trying
been
to be.
like an any and all guy. You're not an either or. You're not a binary. You're an all-in kind of guy. You're actually open to the idea of more and different options.
Well, I fundamentally believe that if you look at the polling across the country, I mean, parents want choice. But I don't think that that's exclusive to charters. We can create choice within school districts. We've already done it in just a couple of years. We will, between the next 3 to 5 years, EPISD and other districts here in El Paso, we will fundamentally look like a charter school of choice. We're going to do it within the school district. Now, I have a big issue with vouchers. We have a constitutional conundrum. The 1876 Constitution says that we offer a free public education. It does not say that we're going to subsidize private schools. So I'm okay with charter schools. I'm okay with the competition. But honestly, I support some of the bigger, innovative ones that show they can scale. I have a problem with some of the smaller ones sometimes that just may pick it apart and make the system harder to work. But fundamentally, it's about competition. No matter where your stance is, charter schools have made public schools better in Texas. They've made us all better. We all compete. We look at what they're doing.
Competition is a good
Absolutely.
thing.
I'm constantly looking at that, whatever. And I want to know, I've visited hundreds of charter schools. I can assure you we are really close to being able to do everything that they can do in a public school. It's just pedagogy and a different approach. Of course, longer school days helps and some of that, but we'll look at that. I just want to go back on one point about the test that I think it's important because Texas, fundamentally, whether or not we have fewer or more tests or how we change them, I think a big step that we've taken that I'm very proud of is House Bill 2804 said that beginning in 2017, only 55% of the measure of a school is going to be the STAR results. And within that 55%, it's growth and it's achievement gap.
Yep.
And the other 45%, they're going to let us work with this commission to begin to see what are the other components that make a great school.
That's a positive step.
Absolutely, because no matter what the test is now,
Right.
we're saying only 55% of it is going to rate the quality of the school. So I think as a state, we've made a big statement there, and then we've got House Bill 743, which is a mess. It says that all of our tests must be valid and reliable. I don't know what TA is going to do with that, because now they've got to go back and look at all of our tests and make sure that one of the things I'm going to propose, I'm not on the commission, but I'm going to propose that we take some sort of a modified PSAT or an equivalent from 8th grade on to 12th grade. Why, if the goal is to get the kids in college, why are we wasting time on a STAR test and paying Pearson $1 billion a year? Why don't we just use the PSAT, which is what the kids need to get into college, or some equivalent? Yeah, come on. It's just a waste of time.
We're going to have you come up and ask questions in a second, and so
Yeah, I know.
you might want to make your way to the front to ask questions. Let me ask Ms. González Reynolds, Commissioner, about on this charter question. The same legislative session in which we cut public education by X amount, the most ever, the TEA's own budget was cut pretty significantly as well. Do you all have, if we expand school choice, we expand charters, do you all have enough capacity within TEA to vet the good ones from the bad ones, to be able to determine whether all this additional choice is providing education at the level and at the standards that people in the state deserve and expect?
Well, SB2 passed last session,
Yeah.
and we actually have been, closing down bad charter schools. So, I
Right.
mean, yes, capacity is always going to be an issue, not just specific to this one issue. I mean, we were just talking about House Bill 1842. Which the superintendent wants to take advantage of, which is basically around this innovation within the school district and releasing some of the requirements from schools so that they can be innovative.
Right.
So it's not, and the issue again was, well, we got this new initiative, but we got no money to actually implement it. So that in and of itself has been a struggle. I mean, we got cut by a third in 2011. Our budget has never really been fully restored. So as an agency in and of itself, we're trying to become that system of support for our school districts.
But you have a
and
lot of
getting out of the way.
unfunded mandates.
Sure, and we have a huge, I mean, I remember, gave me lots of hope. I mean, Governor Abbott, at his state of this, his inaugural address, put the Texas Education Code on the podium and said it's too big. I was there in 1995 under Senator Bivens when we actually pared down the education code to get to what is the specific role of the agency and the specific role of public education in Texas. And I really hope that the legislature looks at that again, because
You think the code could come down?
Absolutely.
It's
There are
growing.
many initiatives in there that we have to make a decision about whether or not we're going to do it because of the capacity issue. And that's hard because we're an agency, and if she has a program she wants us to implement and we don't have the people to do it, but she tells us we better do it, then we figure out how to do it. I mean, so we're always kind of, there's that tension in and of itself, getting
Good.
things done.
Let's move to audience questions, and we'll pick up some of the things we didn't talk about in the course of this portion of the conversation. Ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Perez, and I'm a licensed master social worker with Volar Center for Independent Living.
Yes.
And I was in special ed,
Okay.
and I was in totally segregated classrooms where we couldn't even go to the cafeteria or to the playground with children with disabilities. We were allowed to go to the assemblies, though.
Okay.
I've been working for the past 16 years as an advocate with Volar Center for Independent Living, and we are very concerned about students that qualify for 504 services. And I'm really glad that earlier on in the discussion, somebody said money is never an object. Money should never be an object.
Yep.
And so students with 504 in 504 categories may not necessarily need the specialized learning approach
Let me ask you to get to your question if you
Yes.
just so we have other.
I understand. They may not have the learning requirements that, or learning challenges that 504 students may have. But nonetheless, 504 students have a significant psychobiosocial hardship in growing up with a disability. So I am very glad to see the superintendent of El Paso Independent School District here. I don't know a single work coach from El Paso Independent School District. For the past 10 years, 8 years, I've been working with Socorro Independent School District. They're very good about working with Volar
I need
Center
to
for
ask your
Independent
question.
Living.
I'm sorry. What's your question?
So my question is, how can we better provide, or how can you better provide for students in 504 categories so that they get all of the services that kids in special ed get,
Right.
so that they can achieve? Now,
Do we have an inequity in funding for kids in different categories?
There is
Well,
no
actually, yeah,
funding in
absolutely. One
504.
of our issues, EPIC has lost 5,000 kids in the last 6-7 years. That's $40 million of state revenue. But at the same time, we've added almost 700 kids special ed. The spectrum of special ed kids is growing. There's more. We don't have. We have a little bit of some help with that in the form of. I forgot the name of the index, but it's not much. I mean, I actually am going to go back to the legislature in 2017 and to help us. Charter schools aren't taking these kids, and neither the private schools. And I'm not being critical of them. That's the reality. We are better
We need
set
to
up
be
to
critical.
support those kids, but
Yeah.
the legislature needs to recognize if private schools and charters aren't supporting these children, and we are, we take every kid, no matter the color, creed, and the issues they're facing, we're going to find a way to get it done, but we aren't getting extra money for that. I'm sorry.
Representative, before we go here.
I
yes.
think part of the problem is the weights that do account for the diversity for school funding for some of these populations are completely outdated, right? And we know this. We know for ELL. We know for special ed. We know for all over. We know that the weights negatively impact the school's ability to address the diversity on their campuses.
Absolutely.
And children with special with disabilities are at the bottom of the ladder.
Okay, thank you. Good question and very good issue to bring up. Thank you. Ma'am.
I'm
Sir.
Jordan McGill. I'm a senior at Coronado High School.
Yes.
And we're from We Fill in the Blank, and I was wanting to ask, the education system puts a lot of emphasis on grades and test scores and assessments. And do you think that the education system is more preparing like good students and good test takers more so than preparing people for the real world? If you do, then how do you suggest we increase the exposure to kids to help them learn real world skills and help them become independent critical thinkers?
This is the old problem back when we were all in school. Well, I'm learning algebra. What good is this going to be in the world that I go into later? Are we giving kids adequate, Commissioner, real-world skills in addition to test-taking skills?
Well, that's what this conversation is all about.
Yeah.
That's why there's new conversations about what our assessments are going to look like, about what our accountability system is going to look like with this whole new Domain 5, about what it is the school districts are actually providing to their kids. And then with the implementation of House Bill 5, which is really about providing flexibility for high school kids to decide which path they want to choose, but ensuring from our level and from their level that none of those pathways are, dead ends. So it's really up to school districts, which, do they want to offer STEM? And as you know, there's a lot of career and technology fields that are in the STEM world. There's the business and industry, there's your fine arts, your
Right.
humanities, your public services, and then your multidisciplinary. And so all of them have an element of, a particular pathway that's going to lead to what we are as the initiative that we're taking at the agency called Pathways to Prosperity, which is really about, okay, making sure that our goals is every kid either gets a level 1 certificate, 2-year, 4-year, or, research, go on into whatever university, post-secondary world you want to be, or a career that's going to be high wage, high skilled, and high demand. So yes, we are trying to create that flexibility as a system, and that is going to require that the one thing that I wanted to say, kind of as we were talking about budget and resources, is it can't be in a silo. It can't just be the K-12 system doing the work. We've got to bring in our partners in the community levels, from the workforce, from our business community, from our higher ed community, particularly our community colleges who have so much value to bring to the K-12 system, and then also to our healthcare industry who touches kids every day in their professions.
And Mr. Rodriguez, this speaks to your set of issues, right? So for workforce, one of the things that would perhaps better train the workforce of tomorrow would be to get some of those real-world skills and a look at that real world in school as opposed to some of the more traditional disciplines.
Yes, and I think that a big part of what the commissioner is talking about is the fact that you've got to get engaged in that discussion as you develop your educational process. Where
Right.
today, it's sort of at the end of the chute
It's an
sort of
add-on,
thing.
maybe, right, yeah.
And the idea should be, and it's the whole idea behind the group we've put together, which is to tie that supply side with the demand side and figure out what is that process so that the questions don't start when you're getting ready to take that diploma at the high school stage.
Go back.
But instead, when you're at 5th grade, 7th, 8th, 9th, and moving in that direction.
Excellent.
Really
Thank you.
quick-
Good question.
Well, Jordan, really quickly, I want to say I love your organization. I think you do good work. I wish
Yeah, it's
your
great.
organization was everywhere. I want to be honest with you. I don't think we do prepare students beyond
Absolutely.
grades. And I think that there's
We're
three
not doing
things
a
that we
good
think we
job.
need to work on. One is teaching young people to participate in a democracy. We don't teach, democracy is not innate. We need to teach people to participate. Second is hard work ethic and hard work. I feel that I became successful as a young person because I showed animals growing up, and I would wake up at 5 in the morning and take care of a cow. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's taught me work ethic. And I don't think that we teach, and I think it's difficult because how do you measure that? How do you teach that? And the third thing is critical thinking. I still think we're struggling in teaching young people critical thinking skills. And so moving young people beyond grades is something I'm very passionate about, and I think we need to do better.
There you go. You just got a Mary Gonzalez truth bomb. Right there. She laid a little truth bomb on you. Fine.
We should talk comp ed at some point.
Maria Elena
Ma'am,
Gordon.
how are you?
Maria Elena Gordon,
Thanks,
Moorhead
sorry.
Middle School. I have a 7th grader.
Okay.
My main concern here, living in the border, having been educated in the border, having graduated from Coronado High School,
Yes.
and having served in the Marines. This is my question, and this is the problem that I have with the El Paso Independent School District. My son is in 7th grade. He's an avid reader. He's done very well on his STAR.
All right.
Last year, he didn't do very well in math.
Okay.
So right now, I have him in private tutoring at $40 an hour, right there, the math store on Mesa. This is a problem with closing the gap, and you will never accomplish it. First of all, you need common sense. Okay, number one, you don't take intervention teachers away from poverty-stricken children. You already know your demographics. You know you have a lot of project kids.
All right.
You don't play with their lives. And this is what has happened this year in Moorhead Middle School. The math intervention teacher is gone, and the reading intervention teacher is gone.
Well, let's
and
ask
the governor is sitting on billions of dollars in the bank.
Well, let's ask the superintendent, are you not in possession of adequate resources to staff your schools?
Well, we were trying to be very creative about these situations. We're actually working on a program to bring some Saturday support to these kids and to be able to do longer school days. We're in the process of doing that now. We are struggling with declining enrollment.
Are
so
you
that
down in
means-
staff?
Yeah, we have to be, because if you have fewer kids, you have to have fewer staff. So right now, our conundrum in a decline enrollment district, and Dr. La Torre has been growth, and it's a lot more fun to be growing and doing ribbon cuttings and hiring staff than trying to figure out who needs to go as there's fewer kids. That's our challenge right now, right? So
Right.
we're in the midst of that. We obviously take into account the most important and the most needy of our population, but our struggle at EPISD and every decline enrollment district across the country is we have to get a little bit smaller, and most of our decline in employees is outside of the schools. In fact, 99% of the changes we made have been outside the schools, but they have to impact the schools slightly. You have fewer kids, you need fewer staff.
Let me go to Representative Gonzalez quickly before we take the last question on the last half of the
Thank you.
questioner's point, which is there was a lot of pushback against the idea that the legislature did not spend every dollar that was available
Yeah.
to it in the state budget during this session. It's depending upon how you calculate it, 10, 12, $15 billion potentially left on the table. Now, the economy has been shown not to be as great as we thought it was because of oil and gas prices, something that the commissioner alluded to earlier. You still think it was a wrong decision to be conservative? Because the questioner is saying, why is there all this money left over, and yet we are having to reduce staff and do this and do that, not meet all of our needs?
I think there are other places where we could have set education as a higher priority. Did we need to necessarily do a tax cut when we know that we are going to be impacted by the future of the economy? When we know that there are schools that are having to take away intervention services? Like when we know there are things that are young kids who are not going to be prepared for the next generation,
Right.
but we prioritize tax cuts, I think that's probably a better question.
It's about where the choices are made.
Where the
Okay,
priorities
very good.
are.
Last question, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Juan Cabrera. I too am from Coronado High School and the organization We Fill in the Blank. And more importantly, I'm a student affected by the topics you've talked about today.
Okay.
My question, one can concentrate on the needs of the individual student, but what about the qualification of the teacher? How are school districts making sure that their teachers are qualified enough to teach?
That's a great question. What are we doing about teacher certification, recruitment, training, and retention, and pay? Let's just put everything in one bucket, right? What, are we doing an adequate job of finding people? Commissioner, what do you think from the TEA's perspective? Is the process of finding teachers, identifying qualified teachers, the right process right now?
Well, I mean, you know, I think there is a lot of work that is happening right now with respect to teacher preparation and what are the qualifications that we want our teachers to have as they come out of these preparation programs. You know, I know that we're working on trying to identify the quality, but yet we do have a shortage in our STEM field teachers, and I'm sure you could probably speak more to this than I could. But you know, we're looking at this evaluation system that we're putting into place, that we're resisting the attachment of a percentage mandate, but we do believe that it clearly identifies the qualities in teachers and helps bring those conversations to the table between the teacher and the principal on that campus to improve, whether they're at the bottom or at the top, to continue to improve and strive for our kids. But you know, it is a struggle for school districts, and it is a human capital issue. And I know that many superintendents across the state are struggling with trying to figure out how to backfill many of their shortages, whether the teachers are teaching out of their field, or how they can recruit more teachers, particularly if you live, if there's a superintendent that's on our Extended Learning Opportunities Council and she's in Elgin, but it's real hard for her to compete with teachers, with the market in Austin. So, they have to really think innovatively, how can I recruit and retain and keep my teachers here so that they can keep that quality up.
I just think, though, fundamentally, we're doing two things. We're working closely with UTEP, and I think we'll be a leader in this. We are spending a lot of time with the Dean of Education and all their folks, Dr. Antalicio, talking about the kind of teachers we want to come through the system. So we are backward designing what we want, but we're also, at least at EPISD, we're going to spend an inordinate amount of money on professional development and coaching. We know that for everything else that we do as administrators in a district and all that you do in TA, nothing matters unless you have a great teacher in every classroom. Statistically, kids can go back a year or two if they don't have great teachers. So my primary focus in the next 3 to 5 years is going to make sure that we focus exactly on this issue. How do we make sure we have a great teacher in every classroom? And a great teacher to me is going to be not one that just communicates facts and academic information, but teaches kids how to have the other skills they need through collaboration and creative thinking exercises to help them be successful in life. Those are the skills you need to be successful in life, more than you need somebody talking at you in rows and lecturing. Good. So that is going to be our focus. We're very much interested in that.
All right, well, we have to stop there. We're a little bit over on time. I apologize. I want to thank our great panelists, Juan Cabrera, Lizzette González Reynolds, Mary Gonzalez, and Eddie Rodriguez, Dr. Natalicio, and the UTEP staff. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. I promise we'll be back again soon. Thanks. Okay.